Welcome back to the Abundant Culture Podcast, where business owners like you come to learn how to grow the valuation of their companies so they can sell in the future. On this show, you'll learn how to sell for top dollar and invest in profitable businesses around the country. Now, here are your hosts, Jazz and Joe.
Welcome back to the Abundant Culture Podcast. This week, we are talking about the difference between digital and brick and mortar businesses, because Joe and I have been seeing a lot of people like almost anti brick and mortar business, like the only type of business that somebody should buy or should have is a digital business. And although digital businesses are great, I am not saying that they're not a good investment. They are totally awesome, but there are definitely some cons, and we want to talk about those here.
Yeah. And I think there's pros and cons to each of them, but I think people a lot of times don't look at the cons of online businesses the same way that they would look at the cons of a brick and mortar business. Mm-hmm. So I'll sum up my entire opinion on it in like a short couple sentences, and then I'll explain further. So if I wanted to just make money as fast as I possibly can, I'm definitely going to invest in a online business as opposed to a brick and mortar business, because I do believe that you can capitalize on an online business a lot quicker than you can capitalize on a brick and mortar business for reasons that we can get into in a second. But if I want to make the most amount of money possible, I would invest my money into a brick and mortar business, again, for reasons that we can get into basically right now. Yeah. So,
well, I do want
to
give a couple of examples of like the online businesses.
Okay.
So for online business, what we mean by that is a lot of people know Amazon stores or eBay stores or just
Etsy stores.
Etsy, e-commerce in general. And then you also have like those subscription type stores where it's kind of like a SaaS company, the software as a service.
Yeah.
So those are a couple different types of online businesses. Like QuickBooks would be considered an online business because their products are digital products.
Yep. Software as a service.
Yeah.
And then brick and mortar business is any business that's inside
you walk into, right?
Yeah,
you already know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I say that if I wanted to make money as fast as possible, I would invest in online businesses. The reason I said that is because if you're launching an online business, you don't have to worry about securing a lease. You don't have to worry about putting down a security deposit for that lease. You don't have to worry about paying utility bills for that brick and mortar, for that online business.
And you may not even have employees, because a lot of people, what they do with the online businesses is they outsource with independent contractors. They outsource those from overseas. So instead of paying minimum wage, whether that's $13 an hour or $7.25 an hour, they are now paying whatever they want to, which could be $2 an hour, $4 an hour, $6 an hour.
Yeah. So I do believe there's some pros in I would rather anybody start an online business than to not start a business at all. So don't let me discourage you if you're somebody who's very pro online business. Don't let me discourage you from that. I just want people to know the pros and cons of each one. But I do believe that with online businesses, it's just ridiculous how much money you can make in a short amount of time with an online business. Yeah. It's honestly ridiculous. I talked to a guy a few days ago. He launched a company with like a few $1,000, and they're doing like $40,000 in recurring revenue, monthly recurring revenue. Yeah, $40,000 a month in recurring revenue. And he was able to get to that point in like 4 or 5 months or something like that. That's crazy. Absolutely ridiculous. Can you do a similar thing with a brick and mortar business? yeah, if you already have everything in place, but you can't basically, decide today, oh, I'm going to start a business, and then 4 months from now, with a brick and mortar store, be doing that much revenue in that short amount of time. Unless you have just really ridiculous contacts, I just don't see it happening for really anybody, because, it takes, sometimes weeks or even months just to get the lease signed and just to get the security deposit and to stock the shelves with inventory and like all that stuff that has to go into a brick and mortar business. It takes time to do a lot of that stuff. With an online business, especially if you're doing like drop shipping or something like that, you can have an idea today and be testing it by the end of the week, and that's if you're slow. Yeah. If you're quick, you could probably do it a little bit, quicker than that. So I think what I do like about online businesses is you can get proof of concept for your idea or your business so much more quickly than you might be able to do with a brick and mortar store. And on top of that, it's also less capital intensive. And, you can start an online store for a few $100. Or, if you really want to go all out, a few $1,000. But for a brick and mortar store, a few $1,000 isn't going to do you anything. That's going to pay for one of the items that you have to do on the list in order to get that store launched. But it's the exact opposite with online businesses. You can have a few $1,000 in your bank account and then start generating, hundreds or even thousands of dollars a month in revenue off of a very, very small investment. And those are a couple of the things that I do like about online businesses, which is why I don't knock them. I just tell people that it's not my specific forte. And here's the reason why it's not my forte, personally. Everything me and Jasmine do is for long-term wealth. We want the Abundant Culture brand to be around for the next 200 to 300 years. Not even joking.
When we think of the Rockefellers, yeah. I want people to think of the Mims.
Absolutely. We even just got our portrait. Mm-hmm. We got a professional portrait done.
But not marrying cousins and stuff. We're not doing that in the Mims family. But
I didn't even think about that.
Everything else is fair game.
Didn't think about that. And I won't be in the Illuminati either. I don't know if that's true, but you gotta cover your butt. Because, people get to saying, oh, they want to be in the Illuminati like the Rockefellers. I don't know if they're in the Illuminati.
So
I got totally sidetracked.
Back to the longevity.
But yes, everything we do is for the long term, with the goal in mind that the Abundant Culture brand will be around for the next 200 to 300 years. Longer if, human beings don't find a creative way to kill ourselves. So everything we do, we optimize for that. And that does mean that, yes, we sacrifice a crap ton of short-term money. And I'm not going to lie, it does suck sometimes. It really does. But I do believe that the ends justify the means. Mm-hmm. And I say that to say that, in my opinion, I believe when it comes to making the most amount of wealth and having a almost everlasting footprint on this planet, I do believe the majority of the time, with some exceptions, but majority of the time, the best way to do that is with a brick and mortar business. Obviously, Facebook is an outlier. Mm-hmm. Facebook doesn't apply. And there might be a couple other companies that are online companies that might not necessarily fit into what I'm saying. But for the most part, if you look at the top 100 wealthiest companies on the face of the planet, they have physical locations, and they probably have multiple physical locations.
Well, even with Amazon. So would Amazon be considered an online business, or I guess they're kind of
This is a super interesting topic in itself, because there's multiple types of businesses.
If you own a small business and you might be looking to sell, you could run into some major issues. Forbes estimates that 9 out of 10 businesses listed never actually sell. Why? Because there's only one way to sell. You need to do these 4 steps first. So if you want to be a part of the 10% of businesses that sell for profits, we've created a free checklist for you so you can sell without those hurdles that normally hold you back. Download the free checklist by visiting www.abundantculture.co/checklist.
tech businesses. Let's say there's multiple types of tech businesses. And I think I spoke to you guys before about this guy named Chamath. I really cannot pronounce his last name, but he's an Indian venture capitalist and investor. He talks about there is your sticky bits. He calls them sticky bits. Mm-hmm. And the reason he calls them sticky bits is because they're online businesses that are sticky because they have network effects, like Facebook. Prime example. It's the business itself is made up of bits of data and information,
and a whole bunch of other businesses.
Yeah, and it's sticky. It's like it's hard to get away from Facebook because it's gotten so big. That's one type of tech company. The other type of tech company, I think there's 3, but I only remember 2, is what he calls bits to bolts tech companies. And what a bits to bolts tech company is that when you're taking online information or online data and using that data to create something in the physical world, in the real world. So Amazon would actually be considered a bits to bolts company. And because it's a bits to bolts company, even though maybe their main revenue generator might be the software itself, it can't fulfill a sale without having a physical infrastructure in place. Amazon would not be Amazon if they did not have the Amazon vans. Amazon wouldn't be Amazon if they didn't have Amazon warehouses. Amazon wouldn't be Amazon if they didn't have, I think they have jets now too. It wouldn't be the company that we know and love today as Amazon if they did not have physical infrastructure. So a lot of times when I'm saying, I do brick and mortar businesses, it doesn't necessarily mean that it just has to be like a McDonald's franchise or something where it's tons of locations. But I am saying that I like physical infrastructure. And the reason I like physical infrastructure is because it creates what's called a moat. So Warren Buffett, the reason he says that he'll never sell a share of Coca-Cola stock ever in his life is because Coca-Cola, as far as he's concerned, has the biggest moat on the face of the planet, and no other company has been able to replicate it thus far. So what a moat is, if you think about,
Game of Thrones,
or if you watch Game of Thrones, if you do watch Game of Thrones, you shouldn't do that with your kid. Somebody should tell you about yourself. But we've been binge watching it. But if you watch something like Game of Thrones or anything about, medieval times where there's knights and dragons and stuff like that, they'll have a castle, and around the castle they have like almost a circular lake. Like it's imagine like a pond or a lake, but in the shape of a donut around a castle. And and at least in the cartoon shows, the moats were filled with like alligators and stuff like that. And there was only one way into the castle. They had to let down the bridge for you so that you can cross over the moat. If that bridge wasn't let down for you, you can't get into the castle at all. There's no physical way you can get to it, especially if the moat has alligators in it. So that's what a moat is in a physical sense. And what it did, in medieval times is it basically created a barrier between people who would want to siege the castle and the actual castle. So if you were an enemy of whoever's in this castle, you're going to have a hard time getting in because there's this huge drop-off cliff, and, at the bottom of it is just water. And it's really hard or almost impossible for you to get, to go down there and then climb your way up to the castle or whatever the case may be. So it just makes it hard to get into the castle. Think about a company as being a castle. And the moat is whatever advantages that company has to keep people from competing with that company. So you can think of with Coca-Cola, their moat is that they're just humongous and they have a ton of infrastructure, and they own half of the people that you think are their competition probably. So
they own natural springs, like water wells and everything.
Yeah, we think of Coca-Cola as just being like the Coca-Cola pop or soda, depending on where you are in the country.
But so much more than that.
Yeah, but they own all types of products, all types of food and beverage products. And honestly, I don't know how many they own. I heard somewhere, and I don't know how true this is, but I hear that they have hundreds of products in their product suite that they actually sell outside of just the soda pop. So, like, that's their moat. Their moat is their infrastructure, and in order to compete with them, you have to basically try to replicate all that infrastructure, hopefully in a more cost-effective manner, which is really hard to do, which is why Coca-Cola doesn't have many direct competitors, especially direct competitors that have the same market share that they do. So the reason why I like brick and mortar businesses, or businesses that have a physical presence, is because the only people who would compete with me are the people who have the money to afford that same amount or that same type of infrastructure that I have. So if you think about an online store that costs a couple $1,000s to make, your competition is anybody who wants to make a store for a couple $1,000s. And that's a crap ton of people.
Like, we see a whole bunch of college kids, especially in this arena, because we tried to dabble in it a little bit too before we found out that we didn't really like it, or at least we don't like setting it up. So maybe we'll buy one eventually that's already up and running. But to start one up, we've seen basically the ones that are being sold by college kids.
Yeah, like a lot of them. And all of them college kids, they might not be smarter than you in life, but when it comes to marketing online, they can kick your butt. So it's like, you know, that's your competition. There's somebody out there who's younger, has more energy, is a little bit smarter than you in that space,
and has the time to
and has nothing better to do.
Exactly.
Has absolutely nothing better to do.
And knows technology better than you do already.
Exactly. So it's like, you're not going to beat that person when it comes to, like, if they're your direct competitor, they're gonna eat you alive. You might, you know, get by, but they're gonna have much more market share than you'll ever have. Now, in brick and mortar businesses, the average brick and mortar business costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to start up or even buy.
So the cost of entry, well, or whatever the term is, I just learned this in my marketing class. It's like, when it basically is just about competitors, and like something about the entry is just higher.
Yeah.
So that means that it'll be less people there.
Yeah. So it's like, you're basically cutting down your competitors just by having a higher value type of business. Trust me, there is a lot more e-commerce stores being created every single day than there is local businesses that pay rent, that pay utilities, that has employees, that has staff, that has all of these other things that you need in order to, you know, run a brick and mortar business.
And why not just do it all? Why don't you just have a brick and mortar business that people can physically come to? So, you know, we're not like forgetting about the older generations that don't like technology, because they're still here. Yeah. How about we have a physical store or a physical place for them, and then we also create an online presence. Yeah. So now you're in 2 markets, but e-commerce, or, you know, whatever, it's just so much harder for them to get into 2 markets at once. But you can definitely do that with brick and mortar all day.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I was kind of like what she was saying. I see it as a lot easier to tack on a e-commerce store to a brick and mortar business than to tack on a brick and mortar business to an e-commerce store. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it from a valuation standpoint, I do believe you'll probably get a quicker boost in valuation a lot easier if you tack on a online e-commerce store to a physical store, as opposed to doing it the other way around. So that's the main thing that I like about brick and mortar businesses, is it has a natural moat around it, and naturally there's gonna be fewer people that are willing to compete with me. And that brings us back to what I was saying earlier, that everything we plan is long term. Because it has that moat, that business has a better chance of lasting a longer time. Businesses that have a bigger moat, they get to a higher age before they fail, relative to businesses that don't have a moat. Like the average online store that I look at has only been around for a couple years.
Or a couple of months.
Exactly. Like,
and even usually, like social media platforms, like the newer ones and stuff, they basically, anything online can be a trend unless it's, Facebook or something. Yeah. But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about the average online business owner. Yeah. So this is why I think that as a passive investor, it would definitely be more beneficial to invest into brick and mortar businesses than e-commerce.
Yeah, so
less risk.
Yeah, we wanted to get you guys that thinking about that, just because we don't want trends to become what am I trying to say? I don't want people to see a trend and then they think they have to ditch what's tried and true already. You know what I mean? I think you can tack on trends to what's tried and true, because don't get me wrong, you're supposed to ride trends. I mean, you should at certain points in time and at certain points in business, and especially investing. Trends are everything. But if you want to catch a trend and utilize a trend, that doesn't mean ditch what's already working and what's been working. What has always worked a lot of times will continue to work. You just have to update it from time to time and improve it and innovate it and make it better. So, yeah.
Yep. So that's all we have for you on this episode of Abundant Culture Podcast. If you have any specific questions for us, or if you're interested in investing with us in Abundant Culture Fund, which goes out and buys brick and mortar businesses, then feel free to reach out, email us, DM us, whatever you have to do, we're here for you. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
If you don't diversify your investment portfolio, you could end up losing it all. But most business owners don't know how to diversify to mitigate those risks. That's why we created this resource for you. This passive investing guide is a must-have if you're planning to invest in businesses. Don't hesitate. If you have more than 25 grand liquid, then you can't afford not to take advantage of this resource. Download the 4 reasons why in 2021 you need small businesses in your portfolio now by going to www.abundantculture.co/guide.
Thank you for listening to the Abundant Culture Podcast with Jazz and Joe. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, then leave an honest rating and review. And remember, we're ready to buy your business. So if you're ready to sell or passively invest in other small businesses, go to abundantculture.co for more information. We publish episodes every Friday, so we'll see you next week.